All righty. Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this hearing to order. Tonight, the Small and Minority Business Committee will discuss our city's next step in a critical set of policy changes. This is one of several steps to ensure the City of Columbus is doing all it can to work with a more diverse set of companies. This is part of our shared commitment to support minority and female-owned local businesses. We spent years in research and development of these ideas, and now I'm excited that we are about to advance to the next step, along with the changes we'll be discussing at our next committee hearing on June 30th. I want to thank and applaud Director of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Director Demita Brown. She has been the driver on this process to hold up the mirror to the City of Columbus and show us where we are falling short. Tonight she will walk us through a presentation with the help of Dr. Eleanor Mason Ramsey, President of Mason Tillman Associates, and Rita McNeil Danish, CEO of JD2 Strategies. After the presentation, if we have any council members who are able to jump on, they or I will ask questions, and then we will hear from members of the public. I'll conclude with opening our closing remarks and adjourn the hearing. As background for this hearing, Mason Tillman conducted the city's 2019 disparity study. The disparity study found that significant disparities exist in the City of Columbus's utilization of businesses owned and operated by minority groups and women in comparison to their availability. Mason Tillman also gathered qualitative research indicating that minority women and non-minority business owners allege both active and passive participation in discriminatory practices. We must do better, not only to improve contracting, but also to use our contracting opportunities to empower local minority companies. And in doing that, engage and employ their diverse employees. The city does hundreds of millions of dollars in construction contracting alone, and we need to ensure that it creates local jobs and helps lift families. We thank Mason Tillman for their recommendations for changing our policies and practices. And with that, I will turn the floor over to Director Brown.
Good evening. Thank you, Council President Hardin, and thank you to all who have attended tonight. I couldn't have said it better, Council President. This is a pivotal point in our history as a city as we begin to move this work forward and really help to create equity in our city contracting processes. You will hear from Dr. Eleanor Ramsey as well as Rita McNeil Danish around the path that we've taken to get to this point. You will find that it has been very engaging, very thoughtful, and very strategic. I look forward to sharing the outcomes of the work over the last couple of years and look forward to your feedback. With that said, I will kick off the presentation and turn it over to Dr. Ramsey to talk more about the process and how we got to this point.
Evening, affording us an opportunity to come to you again to discuss the disparity study and its implementation. We will talk about the engagement process, key program elements, and then next steps for City Council adoption. And the final phase of this work will be the implementation of an enhanced MWBE program. So the disparity study process overview. The study was commissioned, you can advance the slide, in 2017. And the disparity study had several objectives. Those were dictated by the decision that the Supreme Court made on January 1989. And that decision said that it was essential for local governments that wanted to have programs that had remedies and program elements specific for minorities and women-owned businesses, that they had to first determine if a statistically significant disparity exists in their award of prime contracts and their prime contractors' award of subcontracts. And that work was studied. And from that, we ascertained practices which affected the disparity, which was documented by the study. And from that analysis and review of the procurement practices, anecdotal information gathered from those businesses that were kind enough to afford us an opportunity to hear about their experiences. And that enabled us to then prepare race neutral recommendations. And based on the statistical findings, we also prepared and included in our report race specific remedies, which were narrowly tailored to our findings. So going forward, the study findings, which I'd like to give you an overview, covered our study period, which was included contracts awarded as of January 1, 2012, up to and including December 31st, 2015. And what we determined that the market area for the spend of the city was Franklin County. And as you can see portrayed in this slide, that a significant portion of the dollars that the city spent during the period of the study was spent within Franklin County. And in fact, 74.73% of the dollars as prime contracts spent by the city were spent with businesses that were domiciled in Franklin County. And a little over 25% was spent with businesses that were located other places in the state and the nation. So go forward and let's talk about what those findings were. One of the things that the study revealed is that there were a few contractors who received the great majority of the contracts that were awarded by the city, which meant that those prime contractors had control of decisions made about the subcontractors that were used on city contracts. And you could see, as portrayed in this slide, that in construction prime contracts, you had 15 out of a total of 235 vendors that received a construction prime contract. 15 of those vendors controlled nearly 70% of the dollars spent on construction contracts. That pattern is consistent with professional services, where 23 contractors were recipients of 70% of the dollars spent on contracts. They received 360 contracts, but they represented 70% of all dollars spent. And goods and services, the pattern is similar. You had 89 companies that received 70% of the prime contract dollars. And so for the two industries, construction and professional services, you had this group of companies, 38 companies that controlled over 70% of the dollars, and in turn, the majority of the decisions made about subcontractors were made by this group of 38 vendors. So we can then look at this spread by industry. If you advance the slide, please. So these the consequence of this analysis revealed that the MWBEs did not receive the dollars that they should have received, most MBEs. And you'll note that in the first grouping, you have 5 groups of business types, ethnicity, and gender: African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, Native Americans, and Caucasian females. And so in construction, each of these groups lost dollars. And dollars lost were computed by determining the percent that a group was available in the Franklin County, willing and able to do the city's work. And the test was to determine if it was parity, if the use of each group was equal to their availability. And thus the dollars reflected by that percent. And so with African Americans, what you see is African Americans received many fewer dollars than they should have based on their availability. When you go to professional services, you see you don't have all 5 groups, because some groups, and in this case, Asian Americans, actually exceeded their availability. And goods and services, again, all groups were underutilized, and receive fewer dollars than they should have received based on their availability. So going forward, we can see how this portrays, is illustrated with the percent of contracts that each of these groups receive. We're referring here to formal contracts, which mean contracts which must be publicly advertised, and solicitations published in various sources as well as on the city's website that advises businesses of the opportunity to submit proposals in response to a formal solicitation. And so all contracts for construction over 100,000 are considered formal and should be advertised. And so here you can see the level of award that was made, and 95.8% of these contract dollars over 100,000 were awarded to non-minority males. And a similar pattern when we look at informal construction contracts, and here informal contracts are contracts where there is not a requirement by the procurement policy and ordinance to advertise. It can be advertised, but it's not a requirement. And again, you can see the pattern of use, and you can determine from the contrast between the actual dollars, blue being the expected dollars, what should have been awarded and what in fact was received. And again, it just illustrates the disparity that we were documented in this analysis. When we look at the subcontracting, we find a similar pattern of participation where the majority of the dollars are being awarded to non-minority males. And take note that they also are controlling the majority of the prime contracts. Therefore, they are making the decisions, non-minority males, about subcontracting that is to be performed by contractors on city contracts. So when we look at professional services at the formal level, and here the formal level requiring advertisement is anything over 50,000. Again, you see the similar pattern of use, contrasting the red with the actual dollars to the blue, which is expected dollars. And the group that exceeded their expected dollars is a group that received the dollars that otherwise would have been awarded to the other groups if there had been equity in the contracting process. So let's go forward to looking at the informal professional services. And again, we're talking about contracts under 50,000, which require a minimum amount of capacity to perform those contracts. And because they're informal, these decisions can be made without advertising. You solicit proposals, but you do not have to publicly advertise. And this, again, will show you the contrast between the actual dollars received and the expected dollars. So we can look at subcontracting, and we analyze subcontracts for construction and for professional services. And again, the expected dollars is greater than the actual dollars for all groups except non-minority males. So goods and services, formal contracts, and in this instance for goods and services, contracts over 20,000 have to be publicly noticed. And again, you're able to see even on these very small contracts, on contracts which are relatively small, even though there are obviously some very large ones in it, you still have evidence of a disparity. So informal, 20,000 and under, advertising is not required to solicit responses. And we have a similar pattern with the expected dollars is greater than the actual dollars, with the exception of Asian Americans and non-minority males. So conclusions that were drawn reflected in the study that we have a disparity documented in the award of construction, prime, and subcontracts. We also have a similar finding for professional service, prime, and subcontracts. And in response to that, we recommended that there be goals for those contracts which are awarded based on low bid. and evaluation points for those contracts where it is a proposal process where submittal and the decisions are based on a proposal or a statement of qualifications as opposed to low bid. And then on the low bid contracts, a discount was recommended. So race and gender neutral best management practices were also recommended, taking advantage of our understanding of the procurement process, the anecdotal input that we received from those businesses that were gracious enough to talk with us, and other practices that have been proven to be effective in communities around the country. So it was a broad effort to try to bring the best to the city of Columbus. So as a result of the study finding and the analysis of available businesses, which was the number used to calculate the expected value, we have made recommendations for goals, for an overall goal that would be met as a result of the collective spend across the industries. And so that would be achieved by the combination of the different ethnic groups' participation. And that goal was set at 25% for MBEs and 19% for women business enterprises. And that's on professional services. And then on construction, we also had a goal, except in the case of Hispanics, on a construction where they were overutilized. And that's a 19% overall goal for MWBEs and 11 for WBEs. We want to fast forward, so I want to turn the presentation over to Ms. McNeil, who's going to talk about the recommendations and the process of getting there.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. And so with the acceptance by council of the recommendations of the disparity study, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion engaged in a stakeholder engagement process. As you may recall, back in 2019, when the City Council accepted the disparity study recommendations, it also ordered that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion proceed with a review of the policy recommendations. And so with that, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion engaged the stakeholders both internally and externally. There was engagement internally with the various departments of the city, which included the Department of Development, Finance and Management, Public Safety, Public Service, Public Utilities, Recreation and Parks, and the City Attorney's Office. But there was also external engagement because it was important not only from an internal perspective, but an external perspective that we have the views and perspectives of those who might be impacted by this program and process. And so there was external engagement that included members of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Council, a number of small minority and women-owned businesses, and then representatives of organizations like the WSBA, Women's Small Business Accelerator, NABO, NAMCO, COMTO, NAACP, and AACG. And the process had engagement separately with each of these stakeholders. So we had engagement with the internal stakeholders separate and apart from the external stakeholders, and then we brought the two together. But in the separate process, we each went through an exhaustive process reviewing each of the recommendations coming out of the disparity study from Dr. Ramsey. And there was a review of not only the race and gender neutral recommendations, but as well as the race and gender conscious recommendations. And obviously, there had to be an assessment of what works for the City of Columbus, what makes sense in terms of our procurement process, but also we did a peer city review. And we took a look not only in the state of Ohio, but also outside of the state of Ohio, big and small cities, to see what was working, what was effective, and what programs they went to implement and what program elements they went to implement. And we used all that information and brought everybody together at the close to assess which of those program recommendations we would include in the City of Columbus recommendation. And so ultimately, from April of 2020 to September 2020, we went through this exhaustive process, reviewed and prioritized all the recommendations, as I said, separately and then together as one group, considered the peer city best management practices, and then drafted a blueprint for the MWBE program standards. And so what we will be presenting today is the culmination of all of that information and all of that hard work and review and consideration as we move forward to implement our new program, Increase Diversity.
Thank you, Rita. And so I'll take it from here and begin to share in more detail some of the policy recommendations that we are putting forth to Council. As Ms. McNeil-Danish just shared, we are calling this new program Increase Diversity because truly it is about us taking a look at our current processes and beginning to understand how we begin to increase our diversity with the recognition of the value of our supplier base, the enhancements to our procurement process, but most importantly, the impact that diversity and inclusion has on not only our operations, but the broader economic impact to our city. And so increased diversity helps us to drive those initiatives forward. It is a comprehensive approach to address disparities found in the report. It's a comprehensive look at our contracting procedures, and it makes an affirmative contribution to the growth and development of small, minority, and women businesses throughout Central Ohio. I'll first take a look at some of the race and gender neutral recommendations from the study and talk about them in more detail. One of the major components of the new policy recommendations involved the establishment of a small local business enterprise program which includes a sheltered market program. This enables the city to stand up a program that enables similarly situated companies to compete among themselves for city contracting dollars. This process really creates an open door, if you will, in that first opportunity for many of our small businesses who have seen or may have determined that city contracting is off limits for them. It gives them that opportunity to get their foot in the door and to make a positive impact to our contracting. And so we're really excited about the sheltered market program and the addition of our small local business program, Another key component, and we heard these things throughout the working group sessions, was we needed to be able to take these very large projects and begin to bring them down into bite-sized pieces so that small local minority businesses and women-owned businesses have an opportunity to get at those projects. And so we are establishing an unbundling policy, particularly with large projects, but also multi-year projects that enable those small businesses to become prime and to establish those relationships with the city of Columbus. A major impediment to our contracting procedures, we heard time and time again, is the requirement of a bond. And so we're implementing a small contract bond waiver that enables our ability to reduce the bond or eliminate the bond completely for projects under $100,000. Again, this is really about creating those opportunities for our small businesses to get their foot in the door and removing those impediments to our contracting process. Bond waivers is one good example in which we're able to do that. We are also enhancing our certification process. You'll have our local small minority businesses, will have the opportunity to certify across a number of programs that enable them to get access to our programs and systems. Again, the small local business process is one of those ways, but we're also looking at how do we bring value to the certification process. And so we're instituting a number of things that will prove to be a benefit to you for the time and the effort that it's spent throughout the certification process. We are expanding our business outreach programs as well. We have traditionally worked with many of our local partners, as well as our departments to enhance our outreach. It will be enhanced even further with the addition of business development support coming through our office, as well as training and other things that will be instituted through not only the City of Columbus, but through our partnerships with our local partners. And then last but not least, it's important to mention that alongside of the work with the disparity study, we have secured a payment tracking and monitoring system that will enable us to monitor compliance on our program. And as we are beginning to stand that up, we know that it is important that our subcontractors as well as our prime contractors are paid in a timely fashion. And so that is a very important step toward moving toward equity and making sure that we're getting dollars in the hands of our vendors. Excuse me. With that said, I want to flip to some of our race and gender specific recommendations and how those relate back to some of the data that Dr. Ramsey shared earlier. One of the questions that we've had from day one is, will there be goals associated with our contract? As you can see from the data that's been shared, there are substantial disparities in terms of how our contracting dollars are awarded. And so the policy recommendations will include the addition of subcontracting goals to help bring some parity to our contracting. There will be a good faith effort standard that will accompany that requirement, for which we will require that prime contractors engage in a number of activities that will support the reasonable attainment of the goals that are established, and create the standards for a waiver of those goals should there be a need and a demonstrated need for that. Pursuant to the study and some of the data that Dr. Ramsey also shared, professional services incentive credits will also be applied for MBE and WBE companies for which a disparity was found. That enables our small businesses, again, to have the opportunity to become prime in those RFP processes and enable them to begin to move those relationships forward with the city. Construction bid discounts will also be applied to our city contracting. I believe it's 5% up to $50,000 will be awarded to our MBEs and WBEs through our construction bid discount. Again, enabling the opportunity to advance their prime contracting success with the city as well. And those bid discounts will also be applied to our goods and services. These are just some of the highlights of the policy recommendations that we are moving forward under the Increased Diversity Program. But I wanted to give you a snapshot of what you can expect. As we begin to move forward with the legislation to council in July, you will begin to hear more about the actual program and the manual that will accompany it. Our goal is to have our legislation to council for consideration next month. We will begin to operationalize a new MWBE program manual, which includes the small local business program as well. Over the next several months, we'll be working with our partners in the Department of Finance and Management and the Procurement Office to update our procurement procedures and the solicitation documents to support the objectives of our new program. We'll begin to also establish training for our City of Columbus staff on the new program, our policies and procedures. That will also include some vendor training to take place at a later date, with the goal of having a new program effective in the city by January of 2022. That concludes the presentation of our new MWBE program. But I just wanted to say that we really have spent quite a bit of time engaging throughout our community to understand what the community thinks is actually valuable in this process, but also internally in terms of what we believe can work through our procurement processes or what needed to change in our procurement process in order to make our contracting more equitable. With that said, I will stop and thank you for your time and turn it back over to the Council President.
Thank you, Director, and thank you to Dr. Ramsey and Ms. Rita McNeil Danish. I'm actually going to start with a question to either Miss Rita. I call her Miss Rita. I apologize. When you know people for a long time, that's what you do. So the public, it's going to be Miss Rita, unless Miss Rita feels that I shouldn't call her that. But I'm actually either Miss Rita or Chief Counsel, who I also always mess up her title. Could you both or one of you talk about the legal sensitivities of a disparity study and implementation? And I ask this question because I want folks to understand the work that has gone into these recommendations, and how we feel that we will be able to defend them if necessary. And that can go to Chief Counsel or to Rita, or hopefully both.
Okay. So as Dr. Ramsey mentioned, the Supreme Court made a determination that if a local government or any governmental entity specific goals for minority and or women businesses, that there was a process called the disparity study that you would have to go through. And that is the process that we undertook. And simply said, I try to simplify it, but basically what the court said is you can't just use make a determination that there is discrimination or that there is a disparity. But in fact, you have to use a statistical analysis process, which will identify what the spend has been, who the spend has been with, and then you can determine where there is a disparity and where that disparity lies. And obviously, there are a number of details that go with that Dr. Ramsey, I'm sure, shared with you as you went through this process. But ultimately, in order to have a goal-based program, you have to go through this process. And it is what we call in law a strict scrutiny analysis. And oftentimes I try not to get bogged down in legal jargon, but it is the highest level of scrutiny. And so you have to have a direct correlation between the data that you acquire that shows what your spend was and who it was with, and that there is a disparity in existence, which justifies having a race and gender specific program. You can always have a race and gender neutral program, but in order to have the race and gender conscious program, you have to have done the disparity study, have the findings, if you will, that there is in fact a disparity, and break down that disparity. And then you have to have a program that is directly in connection with your findings. And so it is all a very connected process that begins with the study, then your recommendations, and then you have to have program recommendations that are consistent with those findings. I hope that makes sense.
That was a great submission.
Wanted to add anything?
Yeah, sorry.
I did. Thank you, Ms. McNeil-Danish, and thank you, Council President Hardin. I was going to build just off of what Ms. McNeil-Danish just said. We have a disparity study. As you mentioned, we have to have then a connection, a deep connection between the results of that study and any legislation that we pass forward. So I kept thinking as we were drafting the legislation here about a nexus. We have to have a nexus. We have to make sure that we are assuring due process in administering the program. And so the changes that you're going to see to Title 39 are a reflection of the results of the study that have been analyzed through that strict scrutiny. We made sure we had a nexus and a connection between the results of the study and what we then put into programmatic policies that Ms. Brown will be initiating, Director Brown will be initiating throughout the course of the next 6 months. And then we also assured that we tightened up and made sure that everyone supported a reasonable opportunity to be heard and to be noticed in the event that they wanted to be certified as an MWBE or MBE/WBE.
Thank you, Chief Counsel. And still for those nervous Nellies, Dr. Ramsey, you performed the study. Has any of your disparity studies been overturned?
No, there's been no successful challenge to our disparity studies, and as both of your councils have noted, we've gone out of our way to ensure that we consider all possible ways of looking at our data. And most importantly, we address one area of vulnerability that studies have had, and that goes to the capacity of the businesses to perform the work. And so we have taken extra steps to ensure that we have documented the ability based on capacity to perform your work. So I too am very confident that all of the efforts that are reasonable could be made, have been made, and the city has devoted considerable time and resources to ensuring that the work is done in the most comprehensive manner.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Director, how will we measure whether or not these new strategies are working? Are we looking just at utilization, or are there other metrics that we can track?
Sure. I actually think that's a really great question. So utilization is probably the ultimate barometer of whether or not we're moving the needle with respect to our overall contracting with minority women and women-owned businesses. But I think there are also a number of other areas that we can look at. One is, are we engaging more small minority and women-owned businesses in our procurement process than we have before? Have we began to take a look at, I just lost my train of thought. There are a number of things that we can look at. Are we engaging them more? Are we providing the training that's necessary? Are we building their capacity? There are a whole host of things that go into our ability to build that capacity and elevate our businesses to more contracting opportunities with the city. So utilization is just one barometer, but there are several things that we will look at. The new system, by the way, will enable us to take all of that data and pull it together so that you really do see a very comprehensive look at our marketplace.
I'm really excited about that new clearinghouse of data for this city, and what folks. And I think it'll be public facing. Some of it will be a publicly facing platform, but so I'm assuming then, or I know that you'll be able to track the work based off department by department and contract by contract. Is that correct? And are there specific goals that we're asking departments to meet with pertaining to their primes?
All very good questions, but you opened the door, so allow me to share one small piece about the work that we started in advance of the system coming online. And so currently today, you can go to the columbus.gov/diversity website. And what we have on there is we call it the hub. And it gives you up-to-date data around our supplier diversity and workforce diversity data. So any person in the public can sparse that data by department, by department. You can also parse it out by the industry or trade that's being let out, as well as an overall. You can do the same thing on our workforce diversity. So we've already pushed that type of data out. The tracking system will also have an outward-facing component as well, and we'll give you an opportunity to even dive a little bit deeper. We're looking at the geography of where our vendors lie, and so most of those dollars being spent on the east side of Columbus or Franklinton or Grove City, or is it going outside of Ohio? There's a number of things that we can do there. We can also look at where our subcontractors are coming from, and if we need to do a better job of working within certain pockets of our community to make sure they're aware of our opportunities and they're getting engaged and getting access to those contracting dollars. So we've already started beginning to build out that data platform, but to your point, that tracking system will really be a game changer, and it allows us to be very transparent about our processes, but also be very accountable to the public. To your question about goals, each department will look to accomplish those overall goals respective to their department. So public utilities looks very different than public safety, than recreation and parks. And so what will be really critical for us is that as we begin to move forward, that the partnerships that we have established with our departments even grow stronger, and we really get into the business of understanding their needs and sourcing the right types of vendors and being our minority and women businesses to accommodate those needs. And so it will be a very wide open field, if you will, for how our departments go about achieving those goals.
And if they are not able to consistently meet goals, how do we engage with them?
So we will be tracking our progress really in real time. When we get to the system, it will be in real time. So we'll do a number of things around, one, we have liaisons who work with each of the departments who are meeting with them regularly to understand their data, what's happening in their project, but also helping to course correct if for some reason that we see we're not meeting those goals. In addition to that, we'll begin to look at, the success of our minority and women businesses in their particular projects, and creating a process to help them understand how they might be able to do better and win contracts there. In our program, I didn't mention it, but in the new program will be a debriefing process that is standardized that really helps unsuccessful bidders understand where they went wrong and how they can improve moving forward. And so our goal is to work hand in hand with our departments to ensure their success, because their success ensures that our small minority women businesses are successful.
One of the tools that I believe that we're going to use are the professional services incentive credit. Would you talk about those, how it works in practice?
Sure. I think it's best probably to turn that over to Dr. Ramsey, and then
Sure.
I could maybe chime in.
Yes, the incentive credits is a method for remedying the disparity at the professional service level, so that at the time that a proposal is evaluated, there will be in the solicitation a stated number of points that would equal the full value of the points. Typically, it's 100%. Sometimes agencies or departments may use a different calculation, but assuming 100%, then the recommendation is that there will be 5 to 10% of those 100 points that would be awarded to a eligible minority business or female business at the time that the evaluation is carried out.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. As part of this, a key component of implementation is encouraging the departments to reach out, do proactive work with minority contractors and such. Is that going to be a role of the departments? Is that an expectation of the departments, or is that an expectation of ODI? Is there how will that work for our large city bureaucracy? And I say that in a loving way.
It's all of the above. And so, really to move the needle forward on our engagement of minority women businesses, it really does require a collaborative approach that brings the decision maker together with the minority business owner. The department has an opportunity to truly articulate their needs. The minority business owner has the opportunity to share how they can really work to address those needs in great detail. And so it requires a collaborative approach that brings those partners together. So to answer your question, our goal is that we will have all of our departments involved in those engagement processes. We'll have to facilitate and drive a great deal of it, but we're going to ask that our departments take ownership of that as well.
Dr. Ramsey, I was just wondering, I was thinking just out into myself around the professional services incentive, the credits. When you're dealing with either conscious or unconscious biases when scoring a referral, Have we seen ever that folks consciously or unconsciously score less, knowing that we're going to incentivize more for one of our protected classifications or protected groups?
I don't have any personal knowledge of the scores being lower. I do believe that the scores generally have been lower. And one of the reasons that you want to look at the incentive for credit is to try to offset that practice. But on the other hand, it is helpful when the reasons for scores are required on the evaluation form. It really forces the evaluator to justify decisions made when their scores are lower, as they may have been in practice because of that implicit bias. So when you're asking for the justification as a part of the evaluation, I think that will help to offset what has been a sort of historic practice of feeling that if the person was not a person that in the eyes of the beholder looked like the beholder, that the scores would be inclined to be lower. So I think that it's an offset to that practice. And I think that there will also be, as you are going to implement your program, less likelihood that you will get the implicit bias being shown in the scores if people are asked to explain why a given score is applied. And as has been noted with the debriefing also brings the business owner in contact with the managers and the team, although at that point the business owner will have lost. But when you have that exchange and you have to be transparent about how you did scoring, I think that also reduces the likelihood of having an adverse impact from implicit bias.
Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. And it was just something I was thinking out loud. I mean, we're fighting against conscious and unconscious biases, and I know we can't solve for everything. Racism is a tricky thing. It finds ways to creep itself into these works. But I just appreciate the work that we've done to kind of adjust for that.
Yes, transparency is helpful. I think the more transparent the process, the less likely will that factor have such an extreme impact on decisions.
I'm interested, Director Fouts, in terms of implementation. How have you seen the departments from implementation side? Are these new components things that will be easily absorbed by the departments?
Director Brown and myself have talked about this quite a bit. I think the answer is yes if our training program is as stringent as it needs to be. As you mentioned earlier, the city is a large entity, so we have a lot of people that will be hands-on at the direct level working on these projects. So we've emphasized in our discussions how important it is for us to make sure that we give the resources to all of the frontline users to make sure that they can implement this program and understand it in its various facets. And that we have, as you mentioned earlier in some of your questions, follow through so that we can measure and make sure that it is being implemented, that it's not just a one-time, this is the new policy. We're very committed, both Director Brown and myself, to make sure that they are trained well, that it's clearly understood, and that they have an opportunity to give feedback to us so that training can improve over the years, and that we're measuring and making sure that it is being implemented correctly.
That's awesome. Who's in charge of the training, and how can you just walk through? I mean, because that's really the nut of this. Those practitioners who will have to work through this every day. I mean, we have the transparency, the oversight by the platform, but who's in charge? Who do we hold account? You know, not in the negative term, but who is going to make sure that our folks on the front line are properly trained and understand these new processes?
So to answer that question, let me go back to something that our procurement manager just shared. When we talk about the department's engagement in this process, I think it's important to note that as we built this process out, they were at the table with us. So we weren't in a silo creating policy recommendations for which they were not involved in. And so that process in and of itself, I think, gives us some assurance that they truly understand what's happening. They're committed to the work and will work hand in hand with us to see that it's implemented. With respect to the training, Sean and I will be the primary drivers internally with respect to the development of the training, the standards, and the need to either retrain or course correct. And so we'll be working hand in hand with the procurement office, Director Lombardi, and the finance and management team to make sure that the procurement standards that we are putting in place makes its way all the way down the line, from the top to the bottom. Folks understand what's expected and are really pushing this forward. One reason why, or one advantage to the increased diversity program, is that we really want people to think about this as every time you push the button to buy a pen or a nail, think about where those dollars are going. And so that's part of the training that we want to instill, is that every dollar counts. And if we're able to really make this happen, we really are creating the equity that we're looking to see.
Thank you. And my last question is about the shelter market program. In that, it mentions that the formal construction projects valued under $100,000. Could you explain the difference between a formally bid construction project and an informally bid project, and what that means for the provisions?
Sure. Sean, do you want to take the informal versus formal?
Yeah, so informal versus formal, the main difference, it's sort of an unofficial designation. I'm not sure the code uses the phrase, but the formals are more, they have procedures that they have to follow every time. Like, for example, to be published on our vendor portal, to be published in the city bulletin. They have to be out there 21 days. Informals, as Dr. Ramsey mentioned earlier, oftentimes people do publish them on the vendor portal, but it's not a requirement in the code. The number of days it has to be on the street is much less. I think 5 days is what we proposed in the new code section. So there is more leeway for good and ill. If it's done well, there can be more increased opportunity. If it's done poorly, it can limit opportunity. So it's important that, again, we train well and that we set standards for how we expect agencies to do this. And the shelter market program gives us that opportunity to increase diverse spending.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate, and that last question was, Zach wrote it, so I apologize. Thank you. I had all the other questions. But at this point, I want to open it up to the public for either more questions or comments. And so I think we have two speakers. I see the first is Ms. Jacqueline Neal, the President and CEO of the Minority Supplier Development Council. Welcome to Council, and you have 3 minutes, but take your time. Look forward to your question or your comments.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. Good evening, Council President Hardin, Director Brown, to City Council members, and Rita, good to see you. Just want to say hello and thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today regarding the important task of eliminating disparities through economic inclusion and supplier diversity. My name is Jacqueline Neal. I'm President and CEO of the Ohio Minority Supplier Development Council, also known as OMSDC. OMSDC is a statewide nonprofit headquartered in Columbus, Ohio. We are Ohio's affiliate of the National Minority Supplier Development Council, a national network dedicated to this important work. I applaud Council President Shannon Harding for holding these hearings to better determine how to increase supplier diversity. OMSDC has proudly partnered with the city and Henry Galat on Columbus's Small and Minority Business Initiative. For nearly 50 years, OMSDC has worked to increase the capacity of minority business enterprises and to connect MBEs with a private sector that understands the value of diverse supply chains and the financial impact it has on their companies. It's important to understand the impact that the minority business community has and how continued commitment to eliminate disparities and barriers to success, combined with concerted investment in minority business development, yields tremendous outcomes. More than 1/4 of our statewide network of certified minority businesses are based here in Columbus and Central Ohio. These companies are in every stage of the business life cycle, from startups to a billion-dollar firm. Together, these firms have revenue of $3 billion, employ 7,000 total employees, and 2,600 minority employees. Across Ohio, our certified MBEs contribute close to $12 billion in output that results in the creation of 52,000 jobs. These same individuals are also contributing over $1.2 billion to the tax base of Ohio. The business case for supplier diversity has already been made. It has been quantified, and the data shows the return on investment for the private sector. Data also shows that hiring diverse suppliers would help narrow the racial wealth gap in this country. But it only works when MBEs hold a seat at the table to demonstrate their capability. So there must be a deliberate and systematic way for this to happen. Supplier diversity is not a separate and distinct business unit within any organization. It has to permeate throughout the culture, where everybody understands the value of including and developing MBEs and not as an afterthought. While not everything transfers over from private industry, there are a number of best practices from which the City of Columbus could benefit. Several are already represented in the program policy. OMSDC stands ready to help the city identify and implement additional best practices or provide counsel regarding reducing disparities. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Jacqueline, thank you so much for being a good partner, a great partner with the city, and kind of being out front on minority supplier diversity. As we look to implementation, do you see an outsized role or a new role for SDC to play in terms of being a partner with the city?
We'd love to. Yeah, I think this is important work. It has a benefit for the government. You heard about the tax revenue that it can generate, right? That's the business case for the governmental sector. But I think there's a lot to be done in terms of development of MBEs. We can play a strong role there because we already have some programs in place. So we're more than happy to partner with the city to help make this a reality.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us and all the work you guys do. Our next and our final speaker to come before council is Avery Frost, who's the Executive Director of the African American Chamber of Commerce. Is Director Frost with us?
I do not see Director Frost in our attendee list, sir. I apologize.
No problem. Well, then I would also just recognize that a friend and someone who is strong in this space in our community, Ms. Sadiqa White, has submitted written testimony that will be shared with Director Brown's office as well, pertaining to this hearing. So, excuse me. So that brings us to our closing then. And I just want to say thank you. I want to thank everyone who has written in, has testified, Ms. Jacqueline, to my colleagues here on council who have been engaged along the way when we have our small minority business meetings. We talk about the disparity study. They ask in-depth questions about our implementation and where we are. So I look forward to bringing this to the colleagues for consideration very soon. Certainly to Director Brown, to Dr. Ramsey, to Mr. Fouts, to General Counsel, Chief Counsel, just joking. I apologize. To my team, Zach Davidson, and the folks who have supported this work. We've covered a lot of material this evening. And for the folks who want to review the slides again, a full video of this hearing will be posted on the City of Columbus's YouTube page. Council will continue to engage with the community and interested parties over the next few weeks. We are looking to advance this legislation in the month of July. I love the broad statement in the month of July. We will get this done very soon. Council goes on legislative recess the last week of July. We will pass this. We will start this implementation before recess, but we do look forward to further community engagement. This is the time for us to hear your feedback. And so if folks are watching at home and have questions and want to engage, you can email me at sghardin@columbus.gov or call my office at 645-2726. That's 614-645-2726. With that adjourns this hearing. Thank you.